Hello everybody and welcome to the next edition of the Frank and Stan chat. And as you can see, we have a guest with us this morning. But before we introduce Angela, we'll go to Stan. How are you this morning, Stan?
Good, it's a sunny morning. Spring is actually around the corner, I think.
Yeah. And yeah, it's been a very, I mean, we often say, we've said this so many times, what are we going to talk about this week about education? But actually it just keeps flooding through, doesn't it? So there's stacks to talk about this week. But anyway, before we do that, hello, Angela Holdsworth.
Hi Frank, hi Stan,
Hi.
everybody, if there is anyone out there.
Yeah.
I'm Angela Holdsworth. I am fortunate enough to be the Chief Education Officer, Chief Executive Officer, I should say, at the Seaview Trust. And we are an inclusive trust of 5 provisions at the schools and then an additional college. So we have 2 provisions over here in Rosendale, which is where I am this morning, and it is sunny in Rosendale. And we've got 4 schools over in Blackpool, so 1 special school, 3 primary schools, and we're split half and half. So 3 sort of our provisions are specialist and 3 are mainstream. And, you know, I'm incredibly proud to be CEO of such a trust because it really does embody all of our values. So very exciting.
Brilliant. And we know each other because I head up the Blackpool Education Improvement Board. So Angela and I never met face to face, but we have spoken on Zoom calls a few times over the last year or so. Stan, what's caught your eye this week?
Well, I'm going to steer just slightly away from education because I think you'll have 100,000 things to talk about on that. It was just the announcement yesterday that Serco had made £100 million profit this year, somewhat helped by the £300 million work that they've been given by the government. And made me think, I wonder if the National Health have made a profit out of the vaccines or the stuff they've done, and how do you balance those two things by saying a company that didn't do well, and the CEO admitted that the test and trace wasn't very good, but it is now a year late, but it is now according to the CEO. But in doing that, they've made £100 million profit, which has gone out to shareholders in dividends. I just question what we're doing.
Right. I feel so we're going to go down a political minefield here.
No, I think we can stop there. It's just what's
my one is around the decision. I wasn't aware of this until yesterday. I had quite a lot of press stuff to do yesterday, and I was interviewed 4 or 5 times for radio. And I wasn't asked this question, but I wish well, I'm glad I wasn't, because I wasn't really aware that it had gone on. But apparently the government are not going to insist that students, pupils, secondary schools, that is, wear masks, and that children are tested. So it's very much left to parents to decide whether or not their children wear masks and whether or not their children are tested. And I just feel as though I was asked on radio yesterday about, well, what's your view about going back on the 8th of March, which actually I didn't really have a view. So I had to come up with something straight away. And I said, well, I think they ought to go back, you know, because actually it's been quite damaging. But actually, I did say that I think it's a shame that the teachers haven't been vaccinated during the half term, which in a way would have gone some way to sort of like mitigate some of the risk. But actually the risk increases now if we have lots of students who want to challenge the system by not wearing masks or not wearing them properly and all that sort of stuff. So that's what caught my eye this week. I haven't got an answer to that, but I just know that if I was a head teacher thinking, well, I could imagine the vast majority of children will wear the mask, but there may well be 1 or 2 who choose not to. And actually, I'm a bit stumped really as to how I'm going to tackle that when in fact the government aren't insisting that they have to wear it. So that's what caught my eye this week.
You could perhaps put it, I mean, schools have changed the disciplinary policies and behaviour policies time and time again. You could put that in a behaviour policy that you to wear masks in classrooms, and then the not wearing of it becomes a disciplinary matter. but within the school, it would have been so much more helpful to say, yes, it's something from central government and you have to do it.
I think the thing for me is that they're not sure now. I mean, I think the risk assessments on this would have been based on the fact, I think, that there was an expectation that everybody would wear them. You know, I can't imagine that they could do really a risk assessment about the transmission of the virus if actually you were then guessing at, well, 80% wear it or 70% wear them, you know. So I think probably, I'm assuming that the assumption was that all would wear them. But actually they're not insisting on that. So anyway, Angela, what's caught your eye this week?
Can I just come in on
Yeah, please do.
What you were saying there. I mean, what I'd say is that risk assessments have to be very much unique to the setting. So I think that, you know, what I'd be saying is that confident head teachers and sort of responsible trusts and local authorities are very much keen on working with their schools to make sense of the guidance. So whatever guidance comes out, it is guidance. And what we can do in our schools is actually make best sense of that. So I think it's always a case of looking at your context. If it is the case that a large minority of children weren't wearing masks, then you'd have to look at the risk assessment for, you know, each of the rooms those young people are in to make sure it is safe and to make sure staff feel confident that they're safe in that environment. So I think it's that sort of thing where we get guidance and that's national and that's sort of helpful to have a steer. But actually, once you get to a school level, you just can't do some of the things that the guidance says. And so you've got to have a common sense approach. And that's something that we sort of did in our special schools straight away. Because if you'll remember back to that moment where we were told that, you know, we were closing schools except for children with EHCPs and children who are vulnerable. And that turned out to be 100% of the children in our special schools. You know, it was ludicrous. So we couldn't do it. So we then started saying, well, okay, that's an ambition. How do we make it work? And I think, you know, that would be my advice to anyone who's scratching their head and thinking, how do we do this? Is just, you know, you can only do what you can do. We're all human. And the priority is always got to be health and safety. So we put health and safety first, and then we make it work for and that would be my advice, if you will.
So what have the challenges been then during lockdown for schools like yours, those that you have?
I think the challenges for all schools have been pretty much the same. It is that sort of thing where, you know, schools are designed and our education system is designed to be a face-to-face system. And the sudden move to trying to offer a remote or blended approach, you know, just blindsided everybody. And nothing has been fast enough. So the rollout of the devices wasn't quick enough. You know, everything has just taken too long. And, you know, we're just about getting to the point where we've got the right devices and internet connectivity, and actually the schools are opening and everyone's coming back. So, you know, I mean, not that anything will be lost. And I think one of the things as a trust we've tried to do is transform our curriculum. So instead of talk about recovery, we're talking about what's the stuff that we always did that we really value and we now know that we've missed out on, and what's the stuff we did that actually had no value at all. And having been sort of, you know, closed in some shape or form over a year, we've been able to evaluate some of that and take it out. So I do think it's been a moment to stop and take stock. And the other thing I feel as a trust that was very new, because we became a trust on the 1st of November in 2019. We then had 3 Ofsteds, 1 a month for the first 3 months, and then we had COVID. So it's been like sort of, we talk about being like the four horsemen of the apocalypse, really. It's sort of not been the ideal start for a brand new trust, but actually we've really come together, and our head teacher board has really been galvanized through this sort of challenging time. And so actually, you know, not that I would say let's have a pandemic on a regular basis. There are good things that have come out of it, but I think that sort of commitment to our children and our families, and in many ways throughout the pandemic we've developed stronger relationships with our families. But definitely in a disadvantaged area like, you know, Blackpool is, it has been a huge challenge. And I really hope that whatever comes out in terms of sort of catch-up funding can be more targeted for areas like ours where, you know, we need is so much greater. But, you know, sort of there will be children up and down the country who are disadvantaged, and everybody needs a slice of the pie. I get that, but, you know, we need more here, and I hope that will be recognised.
Yeah, we've said this before, haven't we, Sam? I mean, there are 2 points here. The first is around distribution of resources. If we are serious about tackling sort of long-term disadvantage, then it can't be spread as it has always been spread. But the other thing is around the issue around looking ahead and trying to make sure that we do end up with head teachers, senior leaders, using this time to reflect on what they've done and where they're going. I think we've lost Angela. Oh, you're still there. You're frozen on our screen there, Angela.
Sorry, can you hear me?
Yeah, we can hear you. So just carry on talking. So the 2 issues there about, you know, distribution of resources. Any additional resources need to go where in effect the pandemic has hit the hardest, and most of those are the areas where there has been long-term disadvantage and probably long-term lack of investment. But the other thing is around, I think Stan's made this point many times about, you know, looking forward and trying to use the time as a sort of time for reflection to see how things have changed and what you need to do in order to improve beyond pandemic.
I think there's also a case, as you've just said there, Angela, of looking at the curriculum in the short term and getting rid of some of the redundant things that we do. And I'm not suggesting that we narrow a curriculum down to just the basics, because I don't believe in that. It's not my philosophy at all. But we do things within those basics that don't really make any sense, other than usually there's something we can test. You know, I was trying to think of examples yesterday in a conversation. I couldn't think of many, but one that always strikes me is something in maths where we do dividing by a fraction. Right? I've never yet found a practical application of dividing by a fraction, but it's something you can do and test, and it's interesting. And if the children can manipulate figures like that, it's good. I don't deny any of that. It's just there'll be bits like that we could say, well, is that necessary now? Rather than talk about catch up, let's have the curriculum of things that matter and that children need. And I do still think it's more about socialisation than about education in the next few months.
Oh, and I think well-being is something, you know, for the staff and the pupils, but also for families. This has been really challenging for everybody. And I think particularly the loss of grandparents for some children, and it's felt like a loss through the time. You know, in some cases there've been genuine bereavements, but for other families, they've still felt like they've lost these older adults who are maybe interested in them and gave them sort of specific attention. And I think, you know, this sort of trying to segregate groups of people for their safety, you know, is a good idea on one level, but on another level is not. We need touch, we need communication. And I think, you know, coming from a special sort of background, it is very much about the human connection and the relationships you make. So teaching for me is all about relationships. You know, if we get the relationships right, it really works really well. And if you really know your children, you get it right, don't you? Nobody needs to give you anything to make it work. It's all in you, and you look at the child and think, well, they need this next and they need that next. And that's what really outstanding teachers do. And we're constantly trying to make a list of sort of instructions for teachers to make them better teachers. But really, we probably need to strip it back and say, you know what, just get to know your children really well, understand where their starting points are, and you know your subject, move them on. You know, if that's where they are now, you need to get them to there, do it in a more personalised way. And that for me is what inclusion is about, really. It's not about lots of fancy add-ons. It's about a perception that actually all children can achieve. We just need to think a little bit harder about how we structure things. And the pandemic is making us do that more, maybe. So maybe that's...
It was interesting. Well, a couple of weeks ago, I referred to it last week, that a minister actually at the Select Committee, Education Select Committee, admitted that poverty was a factor in children's progress. And I think that's something that I'm really pleased has been acknowledged. But actually, it's not. It doesn't prohibit. You know, it doesn't prevent you from having ambition. It doesn't prevent you from trying to achieve the very best. But it's in a sense makes the challenge slightly greater, and I think the point you're making there, Angela, about every child being seen as an individual and their circumstances and their own sort of needs is actually at the heart of just a good relationship, isn't it? It's not just about teaching. This is about why we're chatting together, because we think we hit it off. It's not about, you know, political views or whatever. We just seem to get on, you know.
And I think,
sorry, Angela.
I was going to say, we talk a lot about adverse childhood experiences, or ACEs, and frequently in challenging areas, you look at children, it's like they've got a pack of ACEs in their hand. You know, they've got 1 or 2 childhood experiences, they've got the full pack, you know, and it's how you sort of look at the interconnection and interrelationship between all of those things that have happened to them, but actually believe that at the end of the day, there's something you can do as a teacher that can overcome it all. And if we can have teachers with that passion and belief, that truly believe that if you get education right, anybody can make progress, then I think, you know, we're onto a winner, really.
So what have you learned about yourself, Angela, during all of this?
I think
as a leader.
Yeah, I you know, from a CEO point of view, it's been great to be needed. It's actually felt like I've actually been useful, you know, and actually it's one of those positions where, you know, it's a new thing really, isn't it? Academy trusts are relatively new, CEOs are relatively new. And so I think if CEOs are honest, you do spend some time wondering about, you know, are you relevant and are you useful? And actually through the pandemic, I think because it's been quite rapid and in some cases incredibly rapid, like, you know, last night, like these sort of 8 o'clock presentations of information that are going to be implemented the following morning, you know, you've had to work really quickly and make very quick decisions that are well thought out and sort of intuitive. And I think that's where personally I've found that, you know, that's something I enjoy. I love co-production. So we've pulled together our head teacher board regularly and said, look, you know, this is what's happening. What are we going to do about it? Heard, you know, everybody's point of view and come up with a solution that's going to work for us all. And so I think that's been something that's really exciting. And as a leader, it's a different type of leadership because it's not autocratic in any way. It's very much a sort of, you know, working together to come to the best outcome, but keeping children and families at the heart of everything we're doing. And, you know, that's what I came into education for. That's what I love, really.
Yeah, I think that's why we get on, isn't it, Stan?
At times. I was very heartened by, of all things, Question Time last night. I don't know if you saw it.
I honestly, I've turned off it.
I have as well until the last.
That's the second time you said you've watched it.
Yeah, because if it just flicks on, you do get, because it's the Zoom approach means that you can see the audience reaction all the time, and it's far better than the live audience in my view. But what I was sort of charmed with last night was when they were talking about schools. The politicians were sort of saying, yes, we must get schools back, we must do catch up, we must do tutoring, everything they think they wanted to hear. The audience, when they were asked, were all about children being children.
Yeah.
Give them time. Don't do a summer school packed with academic stuff. Give them opportunities to make friends again, to play again, to learn again. And it was really nice to see that actually the audience had a better grip on what I think's right than the politicians did in those circumstances. And in fact, the guests, the restaurateur and the I think it was a business manager, that they were more akin to saying, let's let children be children for a while than let's fill their heads with a jug of knowledge.
Yeah, there was a study also out this week from the DFE, which was quite interesting in that it sort of tried to do an analysis of what the reading loss or the mathematics loss was from the first period of lockdown. I think it was up to when children returned in September, and then they tested them because they use a national testing, and they just compared them, and it was on average a couple of months, I think, that was lost in terms of reading. And actually this idea about how we move forward, you know, I don't like this word catch up. I mean, we are where we are sort of thing, aren't we? There's nothing we can do about that. But actually we do need to think about how we can make life for young people really enjoyable and exciting. I'm not sure catch-up programs during summer holidays where the sort of communities that I used to lead, it would be a struggle to get a lot of those kids in during the summer holidays, I have to say. So I think it's about opening society up for young people, and everything should be free. All services should be open to young people so they can go and mix and they can enjoy, whatever it is, whether that's at the cinema or whatever it may be.
I absolutely agree. I'd love to be able to use resource better. One of the things that's always frustrated me is how much red tape there is about even opening school buildings, school playgrounds, school sort of provisions during the holidays. And, what we could do with looking at is sort of, do we need all of the legislation we have around some of these things? Because, school sites tend to be incredibly secure and well locked up. Whereas, when I was younger, you could actually go and play on the playing field in the holidays because it was open and you could get into it. Now you've got to break several laws to climb over a sharp sort of razor wire fence. So, I do think opening up provision to community would be fantastic, but it is very difficult for schools to do that because from a regulatory point of view, you're so responsible for anybody who's then on the site using it and any misuse. So I can understand why schools have tended to lock things down, but, certainly we could have a different view on that. The other thing I'd just say about what we're saying about loss of skills is, if skills are lost, then were those skills ever really there? So we assess reading age and we say the children could read these things. And then we have a period where, we don't assess them and then we reassess them and they haven't got the skills anymore. Arguably, they didn't actually have those skills then, did they? They'd been taught to a test and they were able to sort of perform at that level on that day. But, in reality, if we strip some of that back and we actually focus on the build-up of skills and make it much more sort of finely tuned, then, there is likely to be less loss of skill. And what we found in our 2 special schools in the trust is we didn't have that loss of skill at all because of the amount of overlearning that goes into the curriculum we deliver. So there was a little bit of a loss and that tended to be in maths, if I'm absolutely that probably wasn't worked on at home as much, whereas actually for many of the other skills that the children had, they genuinely had those skills because of the way in which they've been taught. And so some of it's about our mainstream curriculum and how we do things, and that superficial knowledge that we give children, which isn't deep and embedded and then doesn't get retained over time. So, that's just a little thing for me to
Yeah, and it was interesting, Angela, the report said one thing we can't test is if there has been a loss in terms of reading ability, how quickly will it take those children to regain it? At the end of the day, nobody knows that.
Having had children when I was a teacher, not when I was a leader, when I was a teacher, having had children with no English coming into your classroom, and within 2 months, 3 months, they're speaking, reading, understanding. It's very rapid. It's not something that's we've lost 3 months of teaching, therefore they're all going to be 3 or some ridiculous things I've seen where we're years behind, even though we've not had a year off. We're years behind in their learning. I don't know. I just think my worry is it's being used by some people for the wrong purposes, and it'll be used to change things that longer term will disadvantage children.
Yeah. Well, I think for me, in the work I do with the Northern Powers Partnership, this is about levelling up. And I think one of the, a good thing of the pandemic in some ways is that for some people, it's highlighted the fact that life is not fair. And actually, I think for some people were not quite clear about how unfair it was, whether that's what you mean, the house hasn't got broadband. What you mean, you haven't got a laptop, you haven't got an iPad, what? And so, for some people in society, they're cocooned in, and they think their experiences is what the experiences of many others is. And actually, I think the pandemic has highlighted, this sort of the differences that there are between those that have and those that don't. And we did talk before, didn't we, Stan, about the Labour proposal at the last election to have broadband in every single house. And that became like, oh my goodness, what a ridiculous idea that is. I mean, well, suddenly, certainly we view the NPP, we view broadband as a utility now. And, it should be like gas or electric, like water, right. That's nearly, over 25 minutes, believe it or not, folks. But we haven't done word of the week.
No,
So, are you going to kick off, Stan? Have you done your homework?
I haven't done my homework, but
Oh, Stan.
I've done some homework on something else, or something, and I'm going to use the word, our favourite word, which is kind.
Oh, right.
Just to take you back to something else that is one of my favourite things, and Jacinda Ardern and the success that New Zealand have had. One of their slogans, one of their 3 slogans, was to be kind. So when we were knocking on the door, Frank, with let's all try and be kind, we were on the right lines.
We perhaps might have been ahead of our time.
Yeah.
Angela, have you got a word this week?
Well, my word, because I've already used it once, and we did. I did a training session for Nathan Holt School Send last night with a couple of colleagues, and we started playing relationship bingo because we were talking about high quality teaching and you know how teachers can improve learning, and each of us mentioned relationship at least 3 times. So I've got to say relationships for me are my word this week and probably every week.
Well, mine is the term pigeonhole, which actually started up as sort of a place where pigeons could sort of rest, and then it became a place where letters could be stored and things like that. But actually, pigeonhole was what I was feeling yesterday on doing the press work, that the interviewers were regularly wanting to sort of put me in a corner, to sort of, in a way, they weren't interested in nuance. They were just interested in being able to label you, to put you in your pigeonhole. Therefore, you are this, and trying to avoid that sort of the way in which they want to sort of put a label against you was what I was trying to fight against. So I didn't like being put in a pigeonhole, which is where I felt as though I was being pushed yesterday.
You broke out.
What's that?
I said, I hope you broke out of that.
Well, I try. It's really interesting, isn't it? You're under pressure when you're doing live radio, and and it's all being recorded.
Well, it's like we said, Frank, that at the moment, for the last 18 months, maybe longer than that, maybe since Brexit, that there isn't shades of grey. You're either one thing or the other, and for some reason, people won't let you say, but I agree with that part of it and not this part. So I'm somewhat, there's as you said, a nuance in where I am, but nobody wants to hear that. They want to
no. Well, it's interesting, like I'll finish on this, but the Northern Powers Partnership, was started by George Osborne, and the work I do for them is not, it's cross-party work, and actually a lot of local politics, national politics works most effectively when people with varying views, from different parties actually do come together to try and resolve something. And it's really interesting the way that people say, well, but it's a George Osborne. Well, it's not. It was, this is the coming together of political leaders across the North, wanting to shout loud about what the North needs. If that is the Stan Johnson party or the Angela Holdsworth party, we shouldn't really. It really shouldn't bother us. We just need to come together and collaborate. To improve the lot of everybody.
And I guess the opposite of pigeonhole is sort of a holistic approach, isn't it? And I think the more we look at the whole situation, the whole child, the whole community, the whole country, we actually, learn lots about ourselves and we become more effective. So, perhaps that's something we should try to sort of focus on and just sort of say, we are a sum of our parts. Diversity is great. And how do we use that to make us all better?
I agree. And on those wise words, we're going to finish for this week. So next week, it's the Frank and Stan together. We haven't got a guest next week, but hopefully you'll all be well, and we'll see you all again next week.